Welcome, everybody. The New York Shield Act. New York Shield stands for Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security. Today, we're going to be talking about everything you need to know about the New York Shield Act. Throughout this presentation, if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear them. We're going to stop and take comments from the audience, so feel free to use the little raise hand button to ask any questions you have, or you could just enter them into the question box and we'll make sure to respond. So thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled to have everybody. And I just want to take a minute to introduce today's speakers. It's going to be a great conversation between Jeffrey Travelli, our founder and CEO at RCS Professional Services, and Christian Scott. Christian is the Vice President of Cybersecurity Services at Gotham Security Incorporation. Christian's primary interests lay in delivering compelling information security services to secure businesses across all industries, including many Fortune 500 companies. And he loves to spread information security insights, as you'll soon see. So like I said, we're also joined today by Jeffrey Travelli, our founder and CEO. For more than 20 years, Jeffrey has been providing terrific IT support services to small businesses in New York, Atlanta, and around the US. Jeffrey's been doing this a long time, starting with a family-owned electronics store in Midtown way back in the day. So since 1999, we've been in existence. So without further ado, welcome everybody, and Jeffrey and Christian.
Hey team, how's everybody doing today?
Good, good, good. Good to see you again, Christian.
Yeah, likewise.
I'm loving that we keep doing these webinars together. We got to keep it going.
Indeed, yeah. And so like Esther was noting, yeah, our organization, we do like to provide a lot of teachable insight via penetration testing and social engineering services for folks. But one of the things that we've inevitably gotten our hands into is also kind of where the rubber meets the road from a cybersecurity standpoint, and people, malicious actors trying to break into people's organizations, also how that relates back from a compliance standpoint and data privacy standpoint. So we've gotten our hands into the data privacy, breach notification, and compliance for the past couple of years now, working with a lot of hedge funds, banks, capital management groups, that kind of stuff, as well as healthcare institutions. So, you know, I would say, unfortunately, I've had a lot of experience of doing work with SOC 2, NYS or NYDFS 500, HIPAA, ISO 27000 series, NIST 853 series. But most importantly, today we're going to be talking about the New York Shield Act. Is that right?
Yep. And I think it couldn't come at a more, timely place, basically. I mean, I'm reading in the paper every day about this pipeline, crypto ransomware. I even heard today that they paid $5 million to the villains. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's true or not, but there's lines on gas stations because of this, and there's really nowhere to run and nowhere to hide at this point. Would you say, right? Like, I mean, everyone and everything is a target.
Definitely, and actually, you bringing up the situation with the Colonial Pipeline just in the news is the fact that the Biden administration just had a new executive order come out. It was yesterday about strengthening the United States' security posture and some of the major initiatives that they want to take from a cybersecurity standpoint. Now, I know that, today we're going to be talking a lot of specifics about the New York Shield Act, but one of the things I think that is going to be kind of important for, everybody who's on this webinar with us is that really this is kind of just serving as a way of really seeing what's up ahead, right? Understanding the curve in the row when it comes to data privacy, breach notification, and cybersecurity compliance, because New York Shield Act, obviously everyone knows about previous to that CCPA and GDPR, and actually there's more states in the United States here that are passing more and more legislation, and there's a lot of talk about passing some legislation at the federal level as well. And so I think that while this serves as kind of a very specific moment of let's talk about New York Shield, we got to do something about New York Shield, but also allows us to be pragmatic about planning for the future and ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for those of you who haven't been around or exposed to an attack, they're happening at a super frequent pace. And it's not just federal governments and not just big corporations that are being targeted and have successfully been breached. It's also small businesses, which are very low-hanging fruit because their systems, generally speaking, are very exposed because, there's not a lot of and following best practices. So, it's real important, as Christian said, and it's only going to get, compliance is going to be stricter as time goes on the state level, on the federal level, and just on the corporate responsibility level, depending on what industry you're in. So, you really got to pay attention to this. But let's talk about the SHIELD Act, right? What's the
Yeah.
SHIELD Act, Christian? Explain it.
So, the New York Shield Act is actually a really interesting beast because there's a lot of folks who, while it's already out and it already applies to folks who are in New York State as well as for folks who are outside of New York State, it's not much news, not much information is out there about it. A lot of people haven't talked about it, and that's primarily due to COVID-19, right? So the New York Shield Act also stands for Stop Hacks to Improve Electronic Data Security Act. That was passed in 2019, and there's two major different components of it, one being about breach notification and the other about requiring businesses that utilize or hold on to New York consumer information to have administrative, technical, and physical safeguards in place. There Again, that those provisions in 2019 then started to apply into 2020, and when they actually apply, where the rubber met the road in 2020, that's when COVID-19 broke out, and so everyone's been a bit distracted, and understandably so. New York State, they haven't really been focusing on the enforcement of the New York Shield Act yet, right? And so usually the thing that kind of gets a lot of people interested in something is when they hear, oh, there's actual enforcement of the law starting to occur, right? And while indeed that
Right.
hasn't occurred yet with the New York Shield Act, there's going to be very soon, more likely than not, New York wanting to focus on that, especially like you were just talking about with everything in the news, everything that's happening, right? And how that can, come back and impact New Yorkers, impact New York State, all that kind of stuff. So that being said, in a nutshell, though, the New York Shield Act is New York's strongest consumer information protection legislation to date. And again, it was enacted in the summer of 2019 and then amended again. And the two major components that really exist for it is the breach notification component, which applied back in October of 2019, which basically meant that if there was some type of New York consumer information that you were working with or holding on to, and that fell into the wrong hands, that you had to follow a certain breach notification process, otherwise you could face penalties for that. And then a second component about requiring businesses to have administrative, technical, and physical safeguards in place to protect New York consumer information, and that applied late March of 2020, right? One of the things that I do want to note that kind of makes it a bit more important or different, and we see this pattern with CCPA and GDPR, is that it has an extraterritorial application, which means you don't have to be a business that's in New York State for this law to apply to you, as well as the penalties.
Right. So that's I mean, the fact that the president's talking about it, with all that's going on in the world today, I mean, this is coming hard and strong, and every business is going to need to do the right thing for their businesses, right?
Yeah.
So, why is it important? Like, why would a business owner care, specifically in terms of the SHIELD Act? Like, so what? Why do I have to follow? What's going to happen if I don't? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question there. So again, it's that extraterritorial application that exists, that if you're in New York or not, if you're handling any New York consumer information, personally identifiable information, and that information gets into the wrong hands, you have to follow New York's breach notification processes. Otherwise, you can face some serious penalties. Now, when we talk about penalties, the penalties for essentially having a data breach occur and then not reporting that to New York State's Attorney General and to the police and all that kind of stuff can actually net somebody a fine up to $250,000. So again, that's really important just from like a direct monetary compensation standpoint, and those fines there. But I think that always there's the element of also that because there's this robust breach notification process that's required, because they have basically this shame list of organizations that have been breached, that it also from like a brand reputation management standpoint, that when an organization has a data breach and that lingering over their head, and New York having that purposely linger over their head, I think it also makes this a little bit challenging, because essentially you have a situation where there's lost opportunities, business
Right.
opportunities with customers, that kind of stuff into the future.
So you're right. So obviously reputation is the most important thing for every business, but flat out from the penalties portion of it, you're saying it's 250K. Is that per incident or per what?
So that's a great question. So as it is with a lot of legalese, there's a certain degree of it being complex and trying to really prove what the scope of a particular security incident is. But if an organization is found to be knowingly or recklessly not reporting a data breach that occurred, right, they can face up to that $250,000 fine. The way they calculate it out is based on the amount of records that were affected. And again, that can vary a little bit. One of the things I am aware of is that if you do have a situation that occurs where there's more than 5,000 New York residents that are going to be impacted, right? That's now getting to the situation and standpoint where you also have to report this data breach to all the credit reporting agencies, have to provide free credit reporting for all the individuals affected. So that's an additional monetary amount that you can face.
Wow.
But usually, like on a per record basis, it's usually like something like $20 per record. But again, you multiply that by 5,000, right? It starts to grow really, really quick, right? It's not like somebody's holding on to 10, 15, 100 records, right, of New Yorkers or anything like that. Usually, a lot of these organizations, they're processing things that are in the tens of thousands of records, right? So that $20,000 can multiply very, very quickly.
Right. And then I just to bring it up, because like at least a few years ago when you spoke about cyber, it was mostly in my view around like websites, right? Like various public consumer facing websites that, potentially were exposed or had exposure if they were, not up to snuff. But that does not necessarily have to mean that it's your server. You could still be in clouds like Office 365, right? If you're an accounting
Yeah.
firm, if you're a law firm, if you're holding tax returns for your clients, if you're holding, personal information about your clients, that's stuff that lives either on your server or on your Dropbox or on your Office 365 or whatever it may be. Those things come into play here, right?
Oh, certainly, 100%. And actually, more likely than not, that's where a lot of organizations really need to tighten up the controls. And we're going to talk about the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards in just a little bit here. But yeah, a lot of organizations, they're just throwing things to a big Dropbox share or S3, AWS S3 buckets, or a SharePoint that's not really well configured. And so when you have a situation like that occurs, be it if it's in the cloud or on-premise infrastructure, right? The fact is from a legal standpoint, from an agreement standpoint, your job and duty, right, is to make sure that that data is protected as you're processing it and as you're storing it. So it
Right.
doesn't necessarily just have to be a website, but all operations of your organization. Kind of one of the more interesting components of the New York Shield, and we'll get into this in a moment, of like who it applies to and how it exactly applies. But healthcare organizations, they don't have to have that. The New York Shield Act actually doesn't apply to their electronic protected health information, their EPHI, right? But they actually still have to apply all the concepts and all the requirements for anything that's not considered EPHI. So a good example would be like your employees, right? And your human resources information, right? If a healthcare provider has that information breached, right, they still need to comply with the New York Shield Act and report that. So it's not just regular consumers or regular users, it's actually pretty much any New York resident's information that you're holding onto or processing, right? And they've really expanded the scope of how they defined that personally identifiable information.
Gotcha. So if someone walked up to me and said, I don't have to worry, my stuff is in Dropbox, I'm in the cloud, I'm good. What would your answer be? We could get to the specifics later. Yes or no?
Yeah, so my greatest concern, honestly, would be core administrative and technical processes in place of making sure that it was appropriately configured and locked down. Usually overly permissible sharing links or you shared something to somebody years ago and that sharing link is still valid and now it goes to a directory that has even more information in it. That is becoming like quite concerning and it's happening all the time. And the way New York actually defines data breaches, right, has then been expanded to be quite nebulous and ambiguous, right? So if you have it where a malicious actor, right, or somebody with poor intent, right, had access to a piece of information, right, the ability to access it for a significant period of time, right, that can be in scope of a data breach, right? If you have a situation where you unintentionally sent a bunch of information to somebody, right? That can be in scope of how they classify a data breach, right? So it might not be one of those situations where you can say, oh, can you just delete that email? That New York is going to be looking for people to report that stuff.
Right. I mean, I love the cloud, and we're trying to be as, serverless as possible and as little as on-prem as possible. But by no means has the cloud simplified things. If anything, it's made it more complicated to some degree in certain areas, especially in this area.
Yeah, and again, we'll be getting to this, but there's a really important component of like as you use more things that are software as a service, they're very helpful. Usually, it's going to reduce the cost for the organization, but at the same time, sometimes they provide the impression that it's a quick fix and it does everything out of the box, right? And it's okay. Well, what about things like what's our data retention strategy, right? Do we have any audit and access logs? Maybe somebody did have access to Dropbox data that they weren't supposed to. Do we have any logs to prove that nobody actually downloaded those documents or not, right? How long do we keep access logs around, right? So there's a lot of components there where the impression is, oh yeah, this is really, really simple. But at the end of the day, people really should be engaging their IT department or IT managed service professionals like you guys, right, to make sure that is well configured and locked down from the get-go, right?
We could get to the next thing. What's the profile of an organization that needs to comply with the New York Shield Act? Is it a certain number of employees, revenue? Like what are the requirements where it actually applies to you?
Great question. So we got the two components of the New York Shield Act. You got the breach notification, right? And then you got administrative, technical, and physical safeguards that need to be implemented. The breach notification component is actually fairly simple. It applies to anyone and everyone, right? If you are working with New York consumer information, right, or New York personally identifiable information, right, be it if you're located in New York State or not, right, and you have a data breach that occurs, you need to report it, right? There's a process stated for that, right? As for the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards component. So this that second component is actually an amendment that New York did, and again, that was the piece of the New York Shield Act that it started applying in March of 2020, and what that is that's an approach of rather than just being reactive with breach notification, being proactive of preventing data breaches, right? And so requiring organizations to kind of establish like a watermark or a baseline for their cybersecurity posture, right? And so for that second component there, and organizations requiring administrative, technical, and physical safeguards in place, it's actually interesting because the way that the way that New York kind of puts it is they use the term that your security safeguards should scale based on the size and complexity of your business. Now, to us normal folk, that doesn't really communicate a whole lot, and that's kind of purposeful, right? That ambiguity can be selectively applied depending on the situation. So nobody, in the next couple of notes that I'm going to have here, nobody should just say by default, oh, that doesn't apply to me at all. I'm not going to do anything. That's a really, really bad idea because New York purposely has this language in there saying, but you do need to make sure that you're scaling your cybersecurity program's maturity to the size and complexity of your business, right? But the baseline components that they have for the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards or requirements are, if your organization, it doesn't apply to you if you're less than 50 employees, you are grossing less than $3 million of revenue of the last 3 fiscal years, right? And if you have less than $5 million in assets, right? So again, well, there may be a lot of small businesses that will initially take a look at this and say, oh, okay, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have to worry about it. New York is was very intelligent of having this specific note saying, hey, but you still need to make sure your cybersecurity program scales with what your business is doing and its complexity, right? So nobody should just take that as a, we don't need any administrative, technical, or physical safeguards, right? And I would hope nobody would want that because, I mean, like we were just talking about earlier, like with the colonial pipeline, right, and all that kind of stuff, that nobody wants to be a part of the news. Nobody wants their brand tarnished that way, right? So again, we're trying to catch ahead of the curve here, right, of helping people understand what those administrative, technical, and physical safeguards might be, right? So that as there's more legislation being rolled out by other states in the United States, or if there's legislation that's rolled out at a federal level, that you're already good to go, that you don't have to scramble last second to patch together a security program and try to convince people that it works.
Right. Could you just clarify? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say there's some questions, but go ahead. We'll do it next.
I just wanted to clarify that we could do the questions. So more than 50 employees, or 3 million in gross in the last 3 years, or 5 million in assets, or all three? Is it one of?
Great clarification there. So any one of these is a disqualifier, right? So if you make less than 50 employees, right, you don't technically have to comply, right? If you make less than $3 million in gross revenue and it was over the past 3 years, right, technically don't have to comply, right? Less than $5 million and total assets, technically don't have to comply. And I say technically as in that's how they define it, but then we have that other component of, again, you still need to make sure that your administrative, technical, and physical safeguards scale with the size and complexity of your business. And by no means am I, do I like market myself as a legal expert or anything like that. But it's fairly obvious, being in compliance for over 15 years now, that that language is purposely built in there for a selective application depending on the situation of the law.
Yeah, as usual, there's a lot of ambiguity around legislation, and
yeah.
They make it hard for us sometimes. But what were the questions, Esther?
Sure. So I hope I pronounced this right, Cameo. I'm going to unmute you now just to ask that. Great question. You would just need to press the little mic button to unmute yourself at this point. You see that on your screen.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, just a quick question around how much this would differ from the process that's set out in GDPR. We are a UK company who sells to companies in New York, where if a data breach happened, it could affect people in New York, but I'm just wondering how the process would change. We obviously have like incident management processes in place, but yeah, just wondering how much that would differ from what we already do.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what's really interesting, so that GDPR is actually quite a bit more of a beast than the New York Shield Act in regards to its requirements. Specifically, there's a lot of requirements about how can an organization use that data in an ethical way and communicate the data privacy rights of individuals. New York Shield Act doesn't deal necessarily with the data privacy rights, so it doesn't say that, hey, you're maybe collecting too much information that you really shouldn't be, and you're retaining it for too long, right? It doesn't have any specific requirements around that or anything. It's very much specific around the breach notification process, and the breach notification process, how it's going to kind of differ from GDPR in a nutshell is if you have a data breach that occurs, you need to make sure that you're notifying the specifically affected individuals or New York residents. You need to make sure that you're notifying the New York Attorney General. So you make sure you have their information. Make sure that you're notifying the New York State Division of Police, and then lastly, notifying the New York Division of Consumer Protection. And so actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop this in the everyone chat here. I'm going to drop just a couple hyperlinks that you guys will be able to reference to in the future, so that you have, all the contact information for all those organizations, and you guys will be set. Cool?
Awesome. It looks like it went just to us. I'll make sure it goes out to everybody.
Oh, okay. Super duper.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Thank you. I'll put that in there in just a moment. Thanks,
Okay.
Kenya. I answered your question.
there's the last component about administrative, technical, and physical safeguards, and really what that is just making sure that you have the basic components of an information security program in place. So what they want to see is they want to see that somebody is conducting, like, for example, cybersecurity risk assessments in one degree or another, or having a third party do something, right, like penetration tests, right? End user security awareness training for staff members so that they're not getting spearphished, that kind of stuff. Making sure that somebody's designated to be responsible for the organization's security program. Physical safeguards in place, including like how the data is stored. Is it stored encrypted at rest, or is it not? How's it being disposed of? Like, we wouldn't want data that's personally identifiable information that's stored on a hard drive that's unencrypted and then just gets thrown in the garbage bin. That would be really, really bad. And then you have all the technical safeguards, right? In regards to preventing, detecting, responding to malicious actors. So, having robust anti-malware controls in place, having, robust security information event management logging in place, like consolidated logging across the organization so that when something does happen, you can find out what happened, how it happened, where it happened, all that kind of stuff. That's what New York State would be looking for that other component, for the technical, for the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards.
So maybe we didn't even plan to talk about this, but like, so that's what your company does for businesses, is maybe explain a little bit and share the process of what it takes to get to the right place. How long does it take? What is the company to expect? I know it depends on the size. I mean, we deal mostly with small businesses of like 10 to 200, but if you want to start there, like, what happens? How do you go about making sure you're okay?
Yeah, so kind of the tips and tricks that I've been providing to a lot of the customers that we work with is about getting the basic components of a cybersecurity program in place, right? And keeping it simple. A lot of times, I think one of the things that people sometimes approach cybersecurity from the wrong angle, or information security and governance and risk and compliance, is they'll say, hey, we want to be ISO 27000 series compliant. We want to be NIST 853 series compliant. We want to be compliant with this and that. We want to be certified in this, all that. And that's like really shooting for the stars, and you're setting yourself up for failure, right? I always recommend people take more of an iterative approach of building baby steps, right? And then, continuously improving the security program over, several quarters, over several years, that kind of stuff. And so usually starting out with something really, really basic like the NIST cybersecurity framework, or the CIS 20, right? The CIS 20, if anybody was hitting essentially the first 11 components of the CIS 20, more likely than not, if in the eyes of New York State, they seem like they're providing enough effort, they're not going to get a major a fine. You know what I mean? Right. But if an organization hasn't even looked at the CIS 20 of what things they should be doing, they should go back and take a look at that. There's obviously a lot of good resources too that are free and available, and some that are fairly inexpensive. So, a lot of times people are like, how do I start writing an information security program? How do I know what I don't know? I usually recommend people taking a look at like the SANS Institute. They got a ton of great free materials and that kind of stuff, or Compliance Forge or Certicate. Those are great resources for getting some like really baseline written information security program policies and procedures and documentation. And then you got to go back and you have to refactor it and that kind of stuff. Now, again, those are all things that I'm saying that people should try to do independently. That's right. By no means that if someone's trying to really hit the ground a little bit faster and harder, right? Obviously, that's when you need to bring in, a third-party expert who's done this a lot of times, right? So, my organization, we help some people with building written information security programs and governance and compliance, that kind of stuff. But and we'll still do that, but our primary focus is usually, I always like to keep it simple. We just want to hack international banks to get paid for it. So we primarily do penetration testing and social engineering, but we got again a lot of that compliance insight that we can help with those smaller firms and organizations.
But if you wanted to be a responsible business, which we all do for the most part, I would say, right? And you haven't really, looked at this seriously, whole cyber thing, right? It's going to take quarters, if not years maybe, to get to where you want to be if you're not really haven't been paying attention to it for a long time or at all.
Yeah, it's going to be really important to marshal the appropriate resources. Otherwise, it'll be an initiative that falls on its face. So one of the things that, when people talk about cybersecurity and data privacy and compliance and all that kind of stuff, is that a lot of times people see that purely as an expense standpoint. But one of the things that when you sit down with executive management, you actually talk to them about like, hey, look, if you build a robust cybersecurity posture, it's going to usually make the organization more like organized and more regimented, which is reducing administrative overhead, right? So that's really good, right? Two, obviously, it's going to reduce the risks that you may suffer, from a ransomware attack, right? So there's all those opportunity costs or malicious opportunity costs that you're avoiding, right? It's also going to reduce, obviously, the costs that's, associated with like cybersecurity liability insurance. If you have a better cybersecurity posture, you're going to be paying less in your cybersecurity liability insurance, right? And then lastly, and this is a really important component that almost everyone's starting to see now, again, with all the breaches, with all the hacks in the news, is people now asking, their vendors, right? Hey, I need to understand what you're doing from a cybersecurity standpoint. So now a lot of people are receiving from their customers security due diligence questionnaires, right? And people are really trying to kick the tires on them now, understandably so, right? Because they're worried about their employees' data. They're worried about their own customers' data, downstream and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a robust cybersecurity posture and program in place, you can actually use that as a differentiator to essentially market yourself as being,
Right.
really robust. And at the same time, in the process of contracting, you're reducing contracting friction, right? So you're able to execute on more sales faster.
Right. I guess I was also just getting at that it takes time to get it to the right place if
It
you
does.
have it. It
It
takes,
does. You got to
yeah,
start with executive management first, though, and have them understand that, like, hey, let's
right,
build a year plan together, right?
right,
And then also, when I talk about marshaling and resources, marshaling and great resources like yourselves, right? If it's a small organization, right, they would be fooling themselves to think that they're going to be able to do everything and anything IT, right, and be able to secure that in a robust manner. They really should be engaging, a thoughtful and proactive IT managed services provider who's going to be able to help improve their cybersecurity posture, but also help to manage at least some of the technical components of it, right?
right,
So that's going to really take off a lot of that, bearing that weight there, so that the organization can more focus on its executive directives. We want our staff to do this. This is what our hiring policy and process is, right? And then
right,
IT making sure that they help follow along with what's the onboarding process, what's the offboarding process, making sure people are getting terminated in a timely manner, making sure
right,
people are not leaving the company with the intellectual property of the company. The amount of times I see employees leave the company and they send themselves emails of all this proprietary data, insane. So
crazy.
I would say an organization, if you're going to be if you're looping in an organization like myself or somebody else, who's specialized in it, you're talking about a 3-month process of kind of like building that first framework of a cybersecurity program. And if you're trying to do it alone, I would say, you're talking probably a good year of getting to that initial footing, and then moving on.
Right. Just some questions maybe that people, you hear the acronym PII a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
explain what that is, and it just seems to be a part of everything these days.
Yeah, so personally identifiable information. So what's really interesting about this is that it is used in all types of circles, right? But it doesn't necessarily have a consistent definition, right, of what is considered personally identifiable information, what's not, right? So for example, if I am tracking your geolocation of your phone at all times, right, but I don't associate it with your name or email address or anything else, right, is that geographic data of you roaming around for the past 3 months considered personally identifiable? Probably. Why? Well, because I can see what your home is. I can see where your workplace is. I can see, like every single place you go. It's not very difficult from a statistical standpoint, right, for me to actually basically identify that data and know, oh, that's Jeffrey. That's Jeffrey going, between his work, home and work and all that, right? There's no consistent legal definition across the board. That's really, really important. So GDPR, obviously New York Shield, at CCPA, they all define that a little bit differently. Generically speaking, though, everyone pretty much concurs that in names, specific dates associated to an individual, like their date of birth, date of death, information such as email addresses, phone numbers, home addresses, all those things. I think that most of the time people just kind of, yes, that is pi. There's no argument about that, right? It's going to be sometimes the little nuances of geography. Is tracking somebody's geography considered personally identifiable information? To GDPR, yes, hell yeah, right? To New York Shield, no, not really. New York Shield defines a lot of things as personally identifiable, but not necessarily a bunch of geolocation points. You know, things like social security numbers, driver license numbers, that kind of stuff, yes, right? But not necessarily geolocation points. So yeah, it's good to always be on the same page with somebody if you're talking with your legal counsel or you're talking with, you know, a security or compliance person and you're talking about a specific subject of GDPR, CCPA, New York Shield, clarifying, hey, this other data that we're working with here, does that legally fit into that scope or definition? Just to clarify.
Gotcha. So just to recap on the Shield Act on a general level. So basically, New York State, decided that it was important to address what's happening, which is basically a slew of cyber attacks around big businesses, small businesses, and they want them to protect themselves better. Is that the bottom line, so that there's less of this going on?
Yeah, pretty much. And the writing's on the wall at this point, right? This is people to notice that this is going to be coming down the line with more states and with the federal government fairly soon, right? That the states and the federal government are not going to take it lying down that there's breach after breach after breach of data, right? And not actually react to it, right? Right now there's a lot of pieces of legislation that are being proposed and being looked at and various levels of review. So really, this is not about, oh, hey, let's get prepared for just New York Shield Act, right? Because the Cuomo's going to come after us tomorrow, right? Now they're probably not, right? But New York, once they kind of get their bearings together, especially after the COVID-19 fallout, probably in the next year and a half, right? They'll probably look to use this as an enforcement measure, right? Because it serves as an area of revenue, right? And the fact of the matter is that state is in desperate need of revenue, right? So that might be an area that they look at, right? It might be a law that they amend and the penalties then increase significantly, right? That's not something that's unheard of, right? Again, we're going to be seeing this happening more and more and more. So this is just kind of the notice to everybody of, let's get things shored up. Let's have a regimented process of understanding when something happens, who do we have to report breach notification to, right? And what type of time scale, right? And also what type of administrative, technical, and physical safeguards should we reasonably have in place for our businesses, right? Be it at different scales. There is one note that actually came to my mind going back to the earlier question, which was talking about the GDPR in New York Shield. One of the things I forgot to note is that New York Shield does not specifically define, by the way, a time period or time frame in which you need to report the breach. They don't say like, oh, you need to report this in a week or within 2 weeks or something like that. They basically use the vague language of as expeditiously, or that actually, I got the quote right here, in the most expedient time possible without unreasonable delay, right? So again, it's up to interpretation. Generally speaking, though, that would mean no longer than, you would never want that to go beyond a month, right? After a month time period, you have a very difficult time trying to justify to anybody that was without unreasonable delay. Usually if you're having a data breach occur, you're getting a cybersecurity company in there, you're engaging legal counsel or your insurance provider, right? They're going to be able to figure out the who, what, where, and how, the situation, all that kind of stuff, usually within 2 weeks, right? So having a notification go out in 4 weeks is not insane.
Right. So what are some of the things, like at least on the small business level, what are some of the things that when you engage with a client and you want to get them to the right place, like what are some of the typical things you're saying, oh, we got to implement X, Y, or Z right away? Like, I'm sure there's a handful that come to mind.
Honestly, a lot of it goes to, so you'll have an organization at first. Every organization has some level of an IT program, no matter if you're one employer or otherwise, right? Because you got a computer, you're using email, that kind of stuff, right? But if you're managing it, IT managed service provider, you got an IT department, whatever. And so, I don't expect a one-person company to have a security program, right? But they can, have some technical security safeguards in place they can secure themselves, like you would secure your own personal home computer, right? So a lot of times what I see when I come into an organization, a lot of the organizations that we work with are in the financial services, capital management, hedge fund, healthcare spaces. They're very big Microsoft shops, and people are leveraging more and more and more Office 365, which is a fantastic platform. And they'll buy things like the E5 licenses. They come with tons of things, tons of features, all that kind of stuff. And I ask, hey guys, you're paying for all this, great licensing and whatnot. Tell me about your data retention. What did you set for your email for data retention? They're like, oh, we didn't set that. Oh, hey guys, what did you do any configuration of your spam handling or anything like that? Do you got safe links set up, safe attachments? You got notifications set up? Are you monitoring for when there's suspicious behavior of somebody's account trying to log in and it keeps failing, and then all of a sudden they're able to log in from Nigeria? Like, who set up for the notifications for that? And usually it's a bunch of stuff that just wasn't tweaked. Microsoft has a great platform and a great solution, but you can't just buy Office 365, right? Add all your users in there and then just assume you're secure, right? So I would say probably the first thing I tell people is, on the smaller business side of things, is that, okay, if you're using this ecosystem, you're using this product, have you had somebody actually go through it and thoroughly configure it, right? Like ask all the right questions and whatnot, because usually that's not. And that's like low hanging fruit. You don't have to pay any additional money. You've already been paying for it, right? Get it configured the right way, and that's going to help make things much more regimented and secure.
Right, and even stuff like two-factor authentication, which is not turned on out of the box, like how critical is that?
Exactly. Exactly. The amount of times I've walked into an organization without multi-factor authentication in place is, if I had a nickel every time, man, I could fill up this entire can. Okay. The fact of the matter is, it's really unfortunate, and I don't blame a small business, right? They're focusing on what they need to do, right? They have their own priorities in place of developing their revenue stream and managing human resources, right? And trying to have marketing and sales. Those things are indeed all important, right? But one of the things I always tell somebody is like, hey, do you got an IT budget? And they're like, no, I don't have an IT budget. Well, I mean, if you don't have budgets for things, right? I mean, how do you know how are you going to actually tackle this, right? So, for a really, really small organization, I say, hey, look, you should at least set aside, right? If it's a 3-person organization, let's say, right? Set aside $1,000 a month, right, for your budget for an IT managed services provider, right? Try to find somebody, right? That's it. That's the baseline, right? Usually it's probably good to plan anywhere from about 1,000 to 3,000 for a smaller organization, and as it scales up. But the fact of the matter is that build an IT budget, engage a good IT managed services provider who's going to be able to kind of configure things and guide you through what needs to happen. And usually they're helping you leverage a lot of technologies and a lot of things you didn't know about before, like, oh man, Planner, this helps improve our operational efficiency, and we get to do more task management. Or, oh, I didn't even know Microsoft Teams had VoIP. Wow, we can actually reduce the VoIP solution we had over here, we can consolidate and save money, So usually a lot of times when people do that, they're saving money, right, by consolidating the complexity of the environment in their services.
Agree. And we were just on a call with Microsoft, I think it was yesterday, about their licensing for Office 365. And you could really get in at the entry level price of like $4 just for email, $8 for Office, $12 for email with Office, but that's not enough, right? I mean, you're really putting yourself at risk if you don't have those extra security products. I mean, at least with all our clients, we've been, trying to push them towards getting that stuff. But to me, it's not even optional anymore.
Yeah, the like the you're talking about the Office 365 like small business licenses. I usually just tell people to go for the enterprise licenses. And
Right.
hey, if you're an organization where you want to try to be agile, right, and not be reliant on the conventional desktop apps, you can go with like the Microsoft Enterprise one with a couple of like extensions to what are they called here? I'm having a moment. But just a couple, additional extensions for like ATP email security and that kind of stuff, or just have everybody go for E3, which is going to handle the majority of your security needs, and you're talking like 20 something bucks per employee, you know,
Right.
per month. You know, it's nothing too crazy, especially, you know, um, a lot of times I actually tell people to look at the Microsoft 365 licenses, right, which provide licensing for like the Office, like for Windows 10 and Office and whatnot. But they also provide people anti-malware and all that, right?
Right.
So,
So
and
there's like
that's like 50
security
bucks.
products, security
Yeah.
products, advanced threat protection, email scanning, two-factor authentication, single sign-on. Those are a lot of the things that if you walked into a place that wasn't paying attention to their security, you'd say, okay, you need to turn
Yeah.
on all these things. And it's not really, sorry, I'll let you go, but it's not really for like laymen, right? I mean, this stuff is like complicated to set up, right? I mean, at least for me, I don't even know how to do it anymore. I rely on my guys to do it.
I mean, like any solution, there's going to be nuances, right? Knowing what works really, really well, what doesn't, depending on the workflows and challenges that a particular business has. One of the things I'll
Right.
actually know, kind of really tying this back to talking about the New York Shield Act and talking about data privacy and breach notification compliance and all that kind of stuff is, you know, the Office 365 ecosystem actually has a compliance center, right? As you're doing things, right, and you're making yourself more secure, it checks off compliance checklists for you and whatnot. And you can generate a report. You know, a customer comes in and they say, hey, I need proof that you're doing all these things. Download the PDF. Okay, here's the report. You know, so it like does tons of compliance work and effort on your behalf as well. And if you don't know what to do, you're like, oh man, we do need to comply with, you know,
Right.
GDPR or something like that, and I don't know what the next step is. I just, you know, maybe you have an IT department and they just want to know, like, hey, what are the technical things we need to do to make that happen? That'll actually show you right in the compliance center. It'll say, hey, you need to do this to check off this item here. Go here to configure that thing, you know? So I think that, yeah, you're correct that you're going to require people with technical expertise, and then those folks with technical expertise working closely with the organization management to make sure that whatever controls are put in place match the organization's workflows. We don't want to introduce a lot of friction to people's process of logging in and doing their daily job and all that kind of stuff. Um, but so I would say that component, and then that goes all the way back to, you know, being able to, you know, provide really good compliance reports right out of the box from that ecosystem.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, we're coming up close to the hour, but at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, this is good, right? I mean, this is stuff organizations should be doing anyway, and the
Mhm.
fact that legislation is saying, you know, you need to do something, you know, it's really, really difficult from our experience to do it when it's too late because it takes so much time to implement a lot of these things. They don't happen overnight. Typically, companies that have been around for a while, they're on legacy systems, and it takes time to pivot to new things. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's good for companies to be aware and be proactive on this stuff, I feel.
Certainly. Again, we're trying to catch ahead of the curve here of the pattern of there's more and more legislation coming down the line here, right? There's more and more malicious actors that are targeting people because they don't have appropriate technical, administrative, and physical safeguards in place. You know, these are pieces of legislation that are extraterritorial, right? So, you know, it can have an impact, yeah, even if you're not in New York. And I think that again, if people are being proactive in the right way, that can serve as a differentiator for their business, that can actually help grow the revenue stream, that can help secure trust with their current customers, that kind of stuff, especially in the light of all these data breaches. Everybody's panicking. And then what I would say at the end of that is that what this also helps ensure is that the organization, being that there's things that are documented and we're being proactive, right? This is a matter of record. You know, when you have a data breach occur, you know, again, the New York, how they define it being reckless, right? It'll be fairly obvious if a data breach occurs that somebody didn't have an administrative, technical, physical safeguards in place when the police department, right, and the FBI, they go to do their investigation in your environment, right? Because that's what they're going to want to do. They're going to want to look at all those resources. They're going to want to see all the logs. They're going to want to know what's going on, right? So somebody who's trying to rush something last second, you're not fooling anybody, right? If you have a data breach occur while you're trying to rush stuff together, right, it's going to be a fairly obvious matter of record that that was a bit more reckless, right? You're more likely to get hit with that $250,000 fine, right? At least if someone's starting to be pragmatic and they come up with a game plan and they start executing on these things, even if it takes a little bit more time, that's the right thing to do. and making sure you're engaging the right resources, have a plan of action, start executing on it, keep making progress. And then even if there's a data breach that occurs, at least you can say, hey, look, we weren't knowingly negligent or reckless or anything like that, right? We were really trying to do our best, you know?
Right. Well, I don't know. We're coming up to the top of the hour. No one dropped off, so that's a good sign. This was very interesting to people. Esther, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have one more. I think you wanted me to ask it, but the question is, any idea if cyber insurance will take care of the notification that the Shield Act requires when there is a data breach? Not sure.
Yes. So, great question. So, a lot of cyber insurance or cyber liability insurance providers will actually help you take care of that breach notification process. So, one of the things that's important is when you have cybersecurity liability insurance in place, read the fine print. They usually, when something happens, it gets defined as classically as a data breach. They're going to require you usually to engage one of their own security companies that they're affiliated with, right? So they'll say, hey, don't reach out to your own legal counsel. Don't reach out to some other security company or anything like that. You need to reach out to this security firm. This is how you reach out to them here, right? The reason being, to be perfectly honest, is they want to maintain a certain level of attorney-client privilege, right, in that process, because they're going to have their own legal counsel come in and advise on things, right? They'll bring in a security team that will then do analysis on what's going on, try to help contain things, and then at the same time, they'll also advise on the breach notification process. One of the things that's really, really important, though, is there's a lot of people who think that cybersecurity liability insurance is like, oh, this is my silver bullet. I don't really need to do anything. Not really. The reason being is that usually when people get cybersecurity liability insurance, you have to provide some level of attestation of what your security safeguards are in the first place. And if they go to do their investigation and it seems like you're really negligent, they're going to say, well, we're not going to pay for all this here. Just so you know, you contractually provided us incorrect information that's fraudulent, right? We can't, that's not covered by the insurance, right? And then a lot of times also insurance, while it may help cover things like, hey, maybe you want to pay a malicious actor a ransomware amount. A lot of times cybersecurity liability insurance will actually cover the ransomware amount, right? As long as it's a certain reasonable amount, right? But they don't cover things like operational loss of revenue, right? So if your business, just because they may recover files, usually it's not a foolproof process when they recover files. Usually it's only about 60 to 80% of the files actually get successfully recovered, right? A lot of these tools, when they encrypt things, right, do it really, really fast and really, really kludgy, right? So if you get crypto lockered and you pay the ransom, don't expect all your files back. There's going to be some impact to your operations and your revenue stream, and a opportunity cost and loss in business revenue and operations impact. That type of stuff is not going to be covered usually by your cybersecurity insurance company.
Right.
So they will help you in the breach notification process, though. So that is a good thing.
Right. Anything else we have, Esther?
Yeah, I think we have one or two more here. We'll try to just keep it moving. Daniel, I'm going to unmute you, and then Kelly, I'll unmute you to ask yours as well. Hold on one sec. Okay, Dan, it looks like if you can just unmute yourself, you could talk.
Hi, Christian. You had mentioned this already. Hi.
Hey.
First of all, great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You had mentioned this already, but I didn't get a chance to write it down. So maybe you could mention it again. Where were you suggesting one goes for a foundational understanding of cybersecurity? You had mentioned 3 places, but
Yeah. So what I'll do, I'll drop actually, I'm going to drop 2 hyperlinks in the chat to you, Esther, and
Sure.
you'll be able to disseminate that out to everybody. So SANS Institute, right? You'll be able to search them up fairly easily. SANS Institute, they provide tons of free and openly available information, right? And some, high-level templates on like policy documents and procedural documents, that kind of stuff, right? My recommendation would be probably take it to the next step of looking at something like Compliance Forge or Certicate, which those hyperlinks will be in the chat here. And usually you're going to be paying for like some baseline templates anywhere from about $300 to $2,000, right? But the really important component is that once you get those, right, start weeding out the stuff that's really not relevant to your organization first, right? So you don't, just because you get a bunch of policy documents doesn't mean you didn't necessarily have to have them all just like that, right? Nobody needs to have 50 documents for a company. It's a 10-person employee company or something like that. And then making sure that you're tweaking that down realistically to what your organization's doing. And I always recommend people, actually engaging your IT team or your IT managed services provider in that process. Hey, what are we doing about email security? Oh, we're using this. Okay, cool. And and how does that protect this? Oh, it does this, this, and this. Okay, cool, right? So making sure that they're getting marshaled in that process. And then I would say kind of starting from like a baseline, what they call frameworks, like security frameworks. It's NIST CSF, the cybersecurity, and then NIST cybersecurity framework, and then also CIS 20. So those are two very basic frameworks that you can have your policies, procedures, your initiatives kind of match to.
Awesome.
And then Kelly,
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Voice.
I think Kelly maybe had a comment. I'm going to unmute you, Kelly. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Sounds like you are in the insurance world.
Yep. Hi, this is Kelly Lennon with USI Insurance. Hi, everybody. Thanks. This has been great. I just wanted to add that business interruption coverage is often part of a cyber liability policy. Obviously, there's no standardization with cyber policies, but we often, most of our policies do include business interruption coverage, which would reimburse the client for the lost business while their business is shut down. So I put my email address in the comments. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to talk to them.
Super. That's excellent. Well, I'm happy to hear that your organization does that. I'll be 100% honest with you. So the kind of the area and landscape that I live in, right, in my perspective, is usually working with organizations that after they've had a data breach occur, right, and I work with Fortune 100 companies when they have data breaches occur, and I do forensics analysis and that kind of stuff, right, that it's really, really interesting when I go back and I take a look. The majority of the cybersecurity insurance providers that I have seen generally have a lot of asterisks or clauses around how they define operational impact and not covering it, essentially. So
Right.
it could be a bit more nuanced, but if indeed your organization provides that's fantastic to hear, and that's great.
Yeah, that's something that I have been noticing is the insurance policies have, actual verbiage that applies more to what's actually going on today with these, we'll pay the ransomware, we'll do X, we'll do Y, whereas like a few years ago, it was kind of a worthless piece of paper unless you were like an internet-based business.
Well, there's a big, I mean, that the insurance landscape is fairly large, right? There's actually more and more people moving into the cybersecurity liability insurance space every single day, right? There's also a lot of reinsurance that occurs there, right? So that being said, again, it's just from my own personal experience of working with, I've probably at this point have done forensics analysis and incident response for about 13 different Fortune 100 companies at this point, and it's very interesting that they have a lot of things to say that, yeah, operational impact is not really covered, that kind of stuff. And what makes it even more interesting is that's how usually they bring me in, because their cybersecurity insurance company, usually they'll hit an end when they do their analysis, and they need somebody else to kind of pull in to really kind of dig a little bit deeper into the who, what, where, and why of the situation. But that's great to hear that there's options like that exist. So you said that information in the chat, right?
Yes, I did.
So,
and I connected with you on LinkedIn.
Oh, excellent. Awesome.
Yeah, if anybody else wants to connect with Kelly, we can.
Yeah, let's share Kelly's information on the follow-up email that goes out to everyone. Maybe she can help them. All right, so
any other good questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
Just one more real quick here.
Sure.
I'll just read it off, Dan. I'm not sure if you got this answer, but is it only Microsoft, Jeff? This one may be better for you. Is it only Microsoft Enterprise that does the compliance check, or does Office 365 do that also?
So basically the Office 365, they've made it quite complicated, I gotta be honest with you. Microsoft has, in terms of the different services that you could buy, and they happen to name them all almost identically the same. But the ones that start with E are enterprise plans, and they're generally have more feature sets to them. There's a new one that came out. It's called M365, which is Microsoft 365. And in that, there's like a $20 plan that checks most of the security boxes. And then you could layer on another E5, which is Enterprise Mobility Suite, which is an extra $15 if you really wanted to check all the security boxes. But feel free to reach out to Esther on that, or we could set up a call to go over all the different feature sets. There's a lot Google's doing as well. If you're on the G Suite platform, you know, there's different things in and around that. So, you know, yeah, it's not terribly straightforward, unfortunately. So be happy to set up a call if you want to talk about it. But I don't know if you had anything to add, Christian. Sounds like you want to say something.
I got one just additional addendum. So you got the Microsoft 365 and Office 365, right? Office 365 is mostly focused on like their SaaS services and offering, you know, run your typical stuff of the Office apps and, you know, email, SharePoint, OneDrive, all that kind of stuff, right? The Microsoft 365, getting your Windows 10 licensing, stuff for securing endpoints and all that kind of stuff, right? They both actually come with compliance elements. So I dropped this link into the chat, and this is just the general Microsoft stuff, right? Where they compare the regular Office 365 licenses, right? So like Jeffrey was saying, right? Keep it either Microsoft Enterprise or Office 365 Enterprise, right? The small business stuff doesn't do anything with the compliance, but you'll actually see in this compare plans that they have the advanced compliance, right? That those features start rolling in at the Office 365 E3 level. And I would say that 80% of the businesses that I work with, you have their staff on Office 365 E3. So
Right.
most folks should be able to do some level of compliance work there.
Right. There's the E3, which is like $20. I think the next thing is like E5, which is like $35, and then there's like a $57 plan, which includes everything under the sun. But call us if you want to set up a call, or email. And Esther, we should include the links to the product comparisons on the follow-up newsletter email, webinar email. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Got it in there. And I also put everything in the chat, so feel free to check that out. I think that just about wraps it up. Like Jeff said, feel free to reach out if there's other questions. I put our email address in the chat, and we'll send it in the follow-up as well. And just a quick heads up, we're going to be hosting a 6-person tech panel next month, just a general technology ins and outs, what you need to know, data backup, all the good stuff. So hope you can all meet us there. And later on in the year, we're going to have a G Suite versus Microsoft battle of the fittest with Norman, our CIO. So hope to see you all there. Jeff and Christian, thank you guys so much. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christian. Thanks,
Super.
Esther.
Thanks,
Take
team.
care.
Have a good one.
Take
Bye
care.
now.